It was 2008. After 31 straight years, I put a football helmet on. And for the first time, I wasn't going to be putting the football helmet on anymore. I'd officially retired from the sport that I started to play at 8 years old, and at the ripe old age of 39 years old, my run was over. I transitioned out of football 30 days after retirement into my first pivot as Director of Player Development. In that role, I was tasked with the responsibility of help turning college athletes into professional athletes, not necessarily on the field, but off the field. You see, every player that shows up to the National Football League knows how to play football. They just have never been pro football players. So what we wanted to do in player development department is teach those young men the game within the game, how to become pros. The highest compliment you can get in the locker room is not how well you play, but the fact that you're a pro. You show up every day doing the job that you've been hired to do to the best of your abilities. I served in that role for 9 seasons, had hundreds of players come into my care that I work with every day, got to know their moms and dads. All those things help those guys out of the gate into their career. But it wasn't until going into my 10th year that I faced probably my biggest pivot yet. You see, I had hit a glass ceiling. I was considered the best in the league at what I did, but for some reason within the building, I couldn't get past the entry level of player development. Some of that I put on me because I never went to my leader at that time and says, hey, here's a suggestion that I think could help me grow. And my leader, conversely, never came to me and said, here's something that I think can help you grow. So we'll say 50-50. So for the leaders in the room, 50% of it is on us, 50% of it is on the people that we also lead. So we let them know, don't come to me with a complaint, come to me with a suggestion, and then perhaps we can help you grow. At the time, I was building the program for players that wanted to retire in the Green Bay community. You see, if you were from Florida or Michigan or Ohio or somewhere else down south, I probably couldn't help you find viable employment to help in your post-football career. But if you wanted to stay in the area, perhaps I could go to some of these successful companies that I knew very little about, but I thought at least if I came in as a Green Bay Packer, they would at least answer the door. So I went to this company called Pierce Manufacturing, which is under the Oshkosh umbrella. They build fire trucks. Most kids that grew up in my neighborhood at some point in time, and probably yours as well, said, I'd like to be a firefighter. That was just what kids wanted to be at that time. So I remember going down to the Oshkosh Corporation's Pierce Manufacturing in Appleton, about 30 miles south, and I presented the program of helping professional athletes transition once their careers were over. And I remember the lady saying, I couldn't help but think you'd be great for a position we want to start. I said, well, what is that? She said, people and culture. She said, you see, we want you to take what you do for professional athletes and come and do that for our employees, of which we have 3,000 between Wisconsin and Florida over 6 plants. I lied about the salary that I was making at that time. I think by about $60,000 perhaps, thinking maybe she would talk me off the ledge. She never blinked an eye or batted her head no. So now I was stuck with a decision. Someone's willing to give me an opportunity. Do I really want to take that opportunity? So like most of us, when we have big decisions to make, I went to a mentor of mine, very good friend, who happens to be the CEO of the Green Bay Packers, Mark Murphy. And sitting down with Mark, I told him of this opportunity, and he says, Rob, you haven't been promoted in 9 years? I said, no, sir. Well, my leader was one of his top leaders. So now we have to pick a side, and my side wasn't the favorable one. And he looked at me, not from an employee to leader standpoint, but maybe as a big brother. And he said these words to me, which was the biggest pivot I've heard professionally to this day. He says, you know, Rob, sometimes you got to go to grow. Sometimes you have to go to grow. I was thinking maybe he would say, hey, we'll promote you and get on with the Packers. I took it literal. I called a lady from Pierce Manufacturing, and I said, I'd like to come be a part of your team. It was the most refreshing professional job that I'd had up until that point. See, I understood football. I was walking away from a world that I knew front, back, top, and bottom, into a world that I clearly knew nothing of. I couldn't even build model cars, let alone build a fire truck. But I did have something going for me, was my transferable skills. You see, somehow I made it to be captain of the football team for many years. I remember one coach we had, he says, how does the long snapper keep getting voted captain of the team? No disrespect, he says. I said, well, coach, perhaps the men in the locker room look at the man and you're still looking at the position. I hope to hold the position a lot less than I hold the position of being a man. So that's perhaps why I keep getting voted captain, and I was captain for the 5 years of his team as the head coach. So I went to Oshkosh and I served in that role. The CEO at the time talked a lot about people first. How do we transition and bring what we did in player development into this place? See, there wasn't a drawer to pull open and see how the person before me did it. So I literally had to build the plane as I was flying it. So after 3 years and several excellent reports, what we had brought in there was starting to take shape. We trained 148 frontline leaders to be better leaders for the men and women on the floor. We changed some of the aesthetics of the building because where we go into every day has a lot to do with our job satisfaction. So I served in that role, and quite frankly, I probably would have retired in that role because when I got into it, I was 51 years old. 3 years after that, Coach McCarthy, who was the former head coach of the Green Bay Packers, called me, said, I just got an opportunity with the Dallas Cowboys. I'd like for you to come be my assistant head coach. Well, for a little poor boy from Washington, D.C., who never got a college football letter to say I had worked for the Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys in a lifetime, was just something that I couldn't pass up. First year I went there was COVID year. We were 6-10. Our quarterback broke his ankle. Very tough year. Second year, we won 12 ball games and lost in the first round of the playoffs. Third year, we won 12 ball games, won a playoff game, lost in the second round of the playoffs. Conversely, several of the coaches weren't re-signed, myself included, so I was at a crossroad again. But see, I wasn't just down there being a football coach. I was also preparing because we know the vulnerability of being a football coach. At some point in time, they're going to ask you to leave. Not if it's going to happen, it's when. So I saw the trend around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I said, well, I'm going to get certified in this from an Ivy League university just in case I have an opportunity to ever resurface back with an NFL team or another professional team. So not knowing that I would need this so soon, when I wasn't re-signed, I had that conversation with Mark Murphy again. Do I go back to Oshkosh, or is there an opportunity with the Green Bay Packers? Well, I left with this amount of experience, but 6 years later, I had this amount of experience. And much to Mark's surprise, I did exactly what he said. He says, sometimes you have to go to grow. There's an opportunity back here with us because of what you did proactively over the last 6 years. So if indeed you're ever faced with a situation where you just feel like your head is hitting that ceiling, just perhaps remember this talk. Sometimes you have to go to grow. But if you do go, just make sure you're prepared and you give those people everything that you got, because you just never know when you're going to have to go to grow again. Thank you.